Hello and welcome to the Driver Hire podcast. My name's Tony from Driver Hire Croydon and Sutton.
Hello, I'm Gary from Driver Hire in Colchester.
And we decided to get together to create a series of regular podcasts for people who want to know more about driver hire, but principally to provide hints, tips and tricks to help our drivers be the very best that they can be. Hi Gary, how you doing?
Very well, Tony. It's lovely to be with you side by side again.
Yes, the better way of recording a podcast. Less editing, less computer glitches, less internet worries.
Yeah. And I didn't just drive up to do the podcast. That'd be silly. We came up and we've done a video.
Yeah, so we had great fun yesterday recording a video about different types of pedestrian crossings, which was quite good fun. Watching Gary trying to jump up to press an equestrian button, which he couldn't quite reach, which was good fun.
Yeah.
And dressing you up as a blind man with a blindfold, trying to use a pedestrian crossing.
And that was totally different, and I didn't practice or anything else. It was really disconcerting, and I understand how partially impaired people do struggle at times.
Yeah, exactly. So what's the plan for this week then, Gary?
Well, the government have announced they've got to do some reviews on the driver CPC.
Yeah, exactly. So we thought it would be interesting to talk to some of our drivers, some of our customers, about what they think about CPC and what their view of the proposed changes. Now, when I say proposed changes, these are elements of CPC that are up for review. And so really what we're going to do is just talk through the scope of the review and what we think about it. But I guess before we get into that, maybe we should give an overview of what the current position on CPC is.
Yeah, because we're not talking about modules 2 and 4 here, are we, Tony? We're talking about the 5-year...
The periodic training is...
That's the word I was looking for. It wouldn't pass my lips.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the ongoing, continuous training for drivers of commercial vehicles, both PCV and LGV, or HGV as we tend to call it. And this is the law that came in as part of, it was the EU Compulsory Training Directive, and it became law as the Certificate of Professional Competence in the UK from September 2008 for bus drivers and September 2009 for lorry drivers. And what the law says is that those drivers must take 5 modules of 7 hours each of training in a 5-year window following either the date the legislation came in or 5 years from when they passed their test.
Yeah, so you could do 1 a year, which I think it was originally the idea behind it, but we're finding out most people have been doing 5 CPC courses right near when their CPC card is about to expire. Yeah,
I mean, this is something we've talked about before, and is one of the elements of the review, actually, to see if that can be looked at, because it is. I don't know. I would find it frustrating to wait an entire 5 years to then do 5 days training right at the end of those 5 years, and then the syllabus, the elements of training that people can take are from the full CPC syllabus. And the way this works is that a training provider will write a course, and they will map to that course where from the syllabus they're taking that information, send that through to JAUPT, who's the Joint Approvals Unit for Periodic Training, JAUPT, JAUPT, and they will approve or not that course, and obviously the drivers will attend approved courses. And the thing about it at the moment is that any driver or whoever's paying for that driver's training can pick really any module.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, you could have sat and done driver's hours on 5 different occasions in 5 days at a time.
Yeah.
Wow, it must be dreadfully boring.
Well, in fact, we've heard stories of people doing exactly that, which I can't imagine how mind-numbing that must be. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what's happening? So the government, as part of their review of changes to HGV testing and licensing and training, to try and help create more HGV drivers in the system, One of those things is to review CPC. And of course, because we're now post-Brexit, the government have got some freedom to do that in a way they may have not done before. And so really, let's just talk through the things that are up for review.
Yeah. So we're talking about the periodic training, which I couldn't get off my lips earlier, Tony, where you sit down and do your 7 hours here and not the 2 and 4 parts. And I think this is to get people who have left the industry back in and their CPC cards have expired. Because if you were coming back, if you took myself up, I hadn't done the CPC, I would have to spend a week doing that before I can go HGV driving.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you're right. I mean, it's either people returning to driving who have an HGV license but not a CPC, and so therefore how do they come through, or indeed how people who are in the industry stay in the industry. So it's that part of it, periodic training. So the government review then covers a few areas. Now the first thing is, should there be a difference between somebody who's doing periodic training for the first time and somebody who's perhaps on their, well, what are we now, third cycle round of CPC? Should those training elements be different? And the phrase they've used is, should the requirements apply differently to more seasoned drivers? I think that's a polite word for older drivers. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is interesting, if you bear in mind what Gary said in the intro, is they're looking at whether that 5-year window is the right time frame. So, should you do 5 days of periodic training in 5 years, or should that be changed to even it out? So, for example, could you make it compulsory to have 1 day of training every 1 year, or 2 days every 2 years, or something like that? So that's the second part. The third part is, should there be specific topics? So rather than this, cherry pick anything you want to do, should there be specific topics? And that's interesting because, yes, of course, you can make it job specific if you pick out the bits that are relevant to your job. But if you're just trying to rush somebody through quickly, you just take what's available, which clearly isn't the best way of doing it. So the next part is, currently there's a rigid time frame of 7 hours for each module, although that could be split into 3.5 hours over 2 days. For example, you could do like 2 evenings in a row, but it's 7 hours for that course. So that's no flexibility in that. Could that change? So for example, if you had 20 people on a course and the trainer is dealing with 20 sets of questions over 7 hours, if the same module is delivered to say 3 drivers, it's very unlikely that it's going to last the full 7 hours, because there's 3 sets of questions, not 20 sets of questions to answer. So should there be flexibility in that? The next thing is, should the scope of driver CPC include non-professional drivers? So I take that to mean people who are perhaps driving a horse box for themselves, people who aren't driving commercial vehicle delivering goods.
Yeah, where they're currently out of scope for the driver CPC, but they can still be using a vehicle and they can drive. They should be driving in driver's hours to understand that they can't drive for 4.5 hours and not stop, which, as per all professional drivers, we have to do, and they seem to be exempt from that, and that's not fair.
Yeah. The next part is, should there be an obligation on employers to support the cost of training? Now, Gary and I have got quite a strong view on that one, so that will be easy for us to cover off. And then the last part of the review is, should the CPC qualification gained in another country, another European country, still be recognised in the UK even post-Brexit, in the same way that a European C+E driving licence is fully recognised in the UK, should the CPC be recognised in the UK? So those are the elements of the review. So just to recap, should there be different training for more seasoned drivers? Should that five days training be spread more evenly rather than being able to be bunched up? Should there be specific topics that are perhaps compulsory? Should it be 7 hours for each module? Should it include non-professional drivers? Should employers be obliged to support training, and should European CPC be recognised in the UK? That's the scope of the review. So, what do we do with that information? Well, we have done and are doing a couple of things with this. So we talk to some of our drivers and some of our customers, and really just ask them what they thought about those elements, and how it should and could move forward, and what they would like to see out of the review. And we got some different answers, didn't we?
Yeah, very much so. We didn't want just to have our view on it, because it might just be through rose-tinted glasses and the benefit of us being CPC trainers and so on. So we really wanted to get down to what the drivers and the clients thought about this, and it varied quite a bit between what me and Tony got.
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing that I would say was consistent amongst all the people I spoke to, which I was surprised about, was that every single person I spoke to supported the idea of there continuing to be CPC. Every single person saw the value of the training and the professionalism for the industry of doing it. I thought people were going to say to me, Gary, oh, scrap the bloody thing.
I did too, and we're under a lot of pressure at the moment to get CPC courses for my drivers. They're saying, when's the next CPC course, Gary, I can go on? And they like the face-to-face much more than the Zoom ones, though there's benefits to both. And they want to get together because we learn from each other on these courses, and no one said, oh, I don't want to do it anymore. I've had that, but they do like to see a change in some of the things.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a sense that the advent of CPC has created a level of professionalism in the industry that perhaps didn't exist before. In the same way, and obviously it's not as intense, but in the same way that an airline pilot has to do compulsory hours of training, the public perception of an HGV driver that has to go through compulsory hours of training, starts to sit them in that kind of way of thinking for people.
And it's a bit like forklift or high-ab training. They have to do a refresher, be it 3 or 5 years, depending who you're using and what your insurance company says. And that's a very similar type thing. They're doing something professionally, and so they should have reviews, refreshers, and to do things, because the law does change.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that I was interested in talking to drivers was how they felt about the actual physical training that day. So we're talking about a classroom-based course in the main. I know we've done online courses over the last year or so for obvious reasons, but talking to them about the actual training courses. And one of the things was about comprehension testing. That came up in quite a few conversations, and at the moment it's an attendance-based course. So a driver turns up for 7 hours, attends for 7 hours, and at the end of that, they have that's a tick in the box.
That's it. They've signed their life away when they arrive. They've done the actual time they're meant to be there, and they walk out. There's nothing to, as a trainer, that you go back and review. They've actually taken on board what you've talked about.
Yeah, exactly. And what some of the drivers I spoke to said was that if they come along to one of these courses and they sit there and they participate and they give their opinion and they ask questions and they engage and they learn, you could have somebody that's sitting there next to them that's not particularly interested. And the example I was given was playing with his phone under the desk. In the eyes of the law, at the end of those 7 hours, both the driver that was engaged and the one that wasn't interested are seen in the eyes of the law as exactly the same, and that can't be the case. So actually, from the drivers themselves, there was an interest in the idea of comprehension testing to say, yes, I can demonstrate that I've engaged and I've listened and I've taken part.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean a pass or a fail, but you must have an idea of what you've actually been talking about. And I'll use driver's hours as a prime example. Which way is the brake? Is it a 15 and a 30, or is it a 30 and a 15?
And I thought that was really interesting, because I was surprised that drivers would say to me that they wanted to be tested. And it wasn't really that they wanted to be tested, but they wanted to be differentiated from those that hadn't really engaged.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things chatting to mine, and the ones who keep asking to come on it because they've missed a year because of the COVID situation, they're very keen to get back in there, and they actually enjoy the banter with other people around them. And when I've been on a course updating mine, and I'm doing one this Saturday, I do learn from the other people around me as well as from the instructor.
Yep. And interestingly, though, when I was talking about people not being engaged in the course, there was a sympathy for that, and the sympathy was that actually you might have somebody sitting next to you that's not engaged, but they're not engaged. Why? It could be because they've been sent on the same course, 3 times in a row, because the employer or the operator is just trying to tick box them through the qualification. And this point about doing the same modules, every single person I spoke to said, I'm paraphrasing the words, but the sentiment was the same. It's farcical that you can just do the same modules.
Yeah. If a client chooses what modules they'd like on the course, and they've, for example, got 10 drivers, and it's open for another 10 drivers to come, and if I was personally coming up to the end of my 5 years, I need to jump on a Saturday course for the next 5 weeks, that client's dictated what they are. I've got no say as individual, and we've got 5 courses exactly the same, and that would be... that is death by PowerPoint.
Yeah, and you could see why somebody might be fiddling with their phone under the table in that situation. So I do have a sympathy for that. So it wasn't necessarily a negative in terms of that disengaged driver. It was a negative against the system and how modules could be repeated.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against driver's hours being repeated in different formats, but doing the same day in, day out is a definite no-no for me because it's not going to help anyone.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that I came across was that there were certain things within CPC that most drivers and customers, and indeed trainers, felt every driver should have to do. So that question about should certain modules be compulsory, and the things that came up time and time again in the conversations, driver's hours, road traffic law, load safety. Those were the things that came up in pretty much every conversation. And so it does feel that potentially what you could have is so those elements being compulsory and then other elements being job specific.
Yeah, because you can make that 3.5 hour course, you can split it up to include certain parts as well. It doesn't all have to be about load security for 3.5 hours. You could make it an hour on load security, an hour on driver hours, and so on. And that's to make it a little bit more broader, but enough to cover the key subjects that we need to refresh and remind what the new laws are if there are any changes.
Yeah. And the other thing that came up a lot in those conversations was about training being practical. And I'll try and phrase what the driver said to me. I think if I quote him correctly, he said, "I didn't pass a driving test to sit in a bloody classroom." I think that's the exact sentence. And I get what he means. So he didn't choose an academic career. He chose a practical vocation, and saw no reason why things like load safety couldn't be taught in a practical way.
I couldn't agree more. So if I just go back to what I was saying about the forklift, if you're doing a forklift refresher, you most probably do an hour to 2 hours refreshing on the practical side, the health and safety side. The rest of the time you're sitting on the equipment, moving that about. And so you can go back and you're saying, am I doing this properly now? Have I got my seat belt on? And everything, it's not classroom based for the whole 7 hours. But if you could do load safety, not everyone knows how to use a ratchet strap. Because if you're a tanker driver, why would I need to know?
Yeah, for sure.
And there's lots of different things like that. And we chose this industry for a reason, and it is being a bit more practical with your hands and everything else. We aren't academical from that point of view. So getting out there and be able to strap a load down is much more fun and interactive, and people with more experience will help the people with less experience, in my opinion, because people like to show off their skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that came up consistently across the drivers and customers I spoke to was this idea that from the review, should it be more spread across the 5 years? And pretty much every single person said, it's daft to try and shoehorn 5 modules into the end of the 5 year window. it's wrong for several reasons. One is that driver's been working for 5 years before he's been trained, so surely have the training and then do the work would make more sense. But secondly, if you're forced to sit in a classroom for 5 days in a row or 5 Saturdays in a row, you're very likely to switch off. So.
Oh yeah, yes, no doubt about it. Because I sit in an office like yourself, Tony, majority of the time. If I sat in a classroom for 7 hours, it's very hard to keep your concentration levels. It's a different environment. We're not used to it. Yeah. And as a driver, you might be sitting behind the steering wheel, but you don't sit still for 7 hours or 3.5 hours in the same format and concentrating in that way and taking new information on board. Well, hopefully new information.
Yes. But just to balance that, one customer said to me, that's fine. Have it that you do one module per year, but the admin cost of that CPC card to basically process it 5 times every 5 years rather than once every 5 years, you're going to make it 5 times more expensive. So that would need to be thought about how that could be done in a cost-effective way. And it's a good point.
Yeah, I get that from that point of view. I mean, reducing it to one a year, or you must do one within 18 months because of sickness or whatever, gives you a little bit of flexibility. And I like the idea of doing it so you keep that theory there. And that's my personal view, not just my driver's, by the way, on that one.
Yeah. Okay, so the next part of our research actually is happening on Saturday and hasn't happened yet. So Gary is attending a driver CPC course on Saturday, 2 days' time. And what we're going to do is resume on Monday with Gary having thrown these questions into the mix in that course.
Yep. When I'm doing the introduction, I'm going to be asking that, why are we sitting here doing this? And get their feedback from it. And nearly all of them are my own drivers, so hopefully I'll get a very honest answer from them, and I'll be able to pass that information back to you later.
Yeah, if the answers are very, very honest, make sure you paraphrase them in podcast-friendly language.
Okay, I will do.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to break there, and we're going to resume the review of Saturday's course on Monday on Zoom.
Yeah.
So, until Monday, Gary, thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you very much, Tony. It won't be as much fun as sitting beside you, though.
So, a driver hire podcast first, Gary. A bit of sending you off for some on-location research.
Yep, that's right, Tony. We started our discussion, and I thought I could have a better input after I actually sat on a CPC course and had feedback from 10 different drivers of what their views are. And that's the important thing, is what are the drivers' views? And that's what we need to get across to the government or JOUT, whoever hopefully is reviewing it, and come back and say, yes, we'd like to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So obviously the sound's a little bit different now. We're back on Zoom, and apologies if it's slightly less good than it was in the room, which is always nicer. But how did you get on then? How was Saturday's course?
Well, it was very good. I was sitting with a different instructor. Though I did take half hour of the time up on it, but I thought it was very valuable to get this information across of what the government was reviewing and why they were doing it, and more importantly, what they would like to see different.
Okay. And so what were the kind of main themes then that you picked up on?
Well, the first thing I did ask is, does anyone not think training is valuable? Because the biggest issue we have is drivers CPC is a waste of time. And that definitely didn't come across. And I know we discussed it in our previous part of the podcast, and that was just reassured to me. Of all 10 people sitting there, none of them saw it as a total waste of time.
See, I think that's quite an interesting thing, because, you know, if you wind the clock back to, 2009, we started doing this. I was privileged enough to be on Driver Hire's very first ever CPC course back then, and it was great. But the chat from drivers at the time was, I know what I'm doing. I've done all that. I don't need to go into a classroom. I don't want to do training. I didn't pass my test to go and sit in a classroom. But yet in the research I did and this course, we're yet to hear somebody say that training's a waste of time.
Yeah. They don't always like the content of what they're being taught or how it is being taught, but the actual doing training, they weren't against whatsoever.
I think that's really encouraging. And if one of the objectives of CPC was to improve professionalism amongst drivers, then that very attitude of wanting to train, wanting to learn, wanting to develop, that's fantastic.
Oh, very much so. And that means they're engaging. And I know both of us taught CPC courses in the past. And the biggest issue is if people don't engage, they're the hardest ones to get anything from. But I've always learned, I always believe I've got really good knowledge. But every time I sit in a course, I will pick up this little section and go, I didn't really know that. Because we can't know everything or claim to know everything.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah. I mean, you as an individual are always open to learning, and it's fantastic. It's a great trait to have. But it's good to hear that of the course that you went on. So what else did you pick up from them?
Okay, the biggest criticism or gripe was everyone on that course, even though the course was paid for by the client, is they had to give up their time for it. So a good example would be a forklift driver would be given a day away from the environment to go and do a refresher course, be it for half a day, a full day, either at their premises or the training site. And again, Hired was used as another good example within our industry, where they're away from it, but they're paid to do the course, as well as the time is in normal working time, and they're not giving up their valuable free time.
I think this is a really interesting one, and this was obviously one of the questions we asked at the very outset, which is part of the government review. Should employers be obligated to fund the training? And that's really interesting because every single one of my customers, and in fact we do ourselves, subject to minimum service, we pay for the driver's training. All of our customers pay for their driver's training. But you're right, there is a mix as to whether a driver attends a course as part of their paid salary day, or whether they're giving up their own personal time to do it. So there's a bigger part of that question that isn't in the review, which is not just who pays for the training, but who pays for the time for the person on the training. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, that was the biggest discussion at the beginin. I soon moved on from that because obviously I had a few drivers and I've got to pay them as well if they're on the course. But I do get where they're coming from, and I'm not adverse to that going forward, whatever we need to do to make it right from there. The other point is most of them don't enjoy sitting in a classroom for 7 hours constantly. They're not used to it. They do find it difficult. Especially in the winter, it was a bit chilly, the heating's on. In the afternoon, had a bite to eat and you're feeling a bit lethargic and everything else. And that's the bit that they don't like. They prefer a bit more hands-on and doing things. And one that I was going to mention was strapping. Could they physically strap a load down, go around a vehicle if possible? If not, could we use straps in the classroom? No, it's still not the same. Could we physically do something on a vehicle?
Yeah, I think that came through from the research we talked about earlier, and that which we did previously. I think there's a very much a desire for driving as a practical job. The training can be practical. There's no reason why not. And in fact, that can be done within the syllabus of CPC as it stands. I guess from a training perspective, it's more expensive to deliver. Because obviously you need a vehicle and you need premises, and you can't have 20 people all doing up the same strap at the same time, if strap's the example. So the question there is the balance of cost and relevance. But yeah, I think to me that makes perfect sense. And I think there's definitely a feeling amongst all the research we've done, and clearly your drivers, about the practical nature of training. So what else did you learn from your class?
Sometimes relevance. Or repeating courses. I know we shouldn't be repeating courses and everything else. So if we go back a stage on this, is when you get to the end of your 5 years and you do your 5 courses in the block, it's really hard work for them. Death by PowerPoint was the word used. Can't say I disagree. After sitting on 5 days in a CPC, it would come across as that.
Yeah.
Where I think if we go back a stage, if we done a course once a year, and I know we mentioned this earlier, that is definitely what they would much prefer than leaving it.
Yeah, no, I mean, this point about repeating modules, I've yet to hear anybody say that that's a good idea. And it sounds from what you're saying that the drivers didn't think that was a good idea either.
No, I had one guy on that course. His last CPC consists of 5 days of first aid.
Oh my God, poor bloke. Yeah, so this problem of repeating modules, whose fault is that? Well, it's not the fault of the driver. If they're being sent in to do a course, obviously they'll attend the course they're sent in to do. So part of the problem is customers that haven't planned their training and therefore just trying to, use this phrase again, tick box, just to get somebody through. Well, that's not really thinking about, proper, good, valuable and interesting learning. So I think, operators who plan their training and spread it out over time would be in a far better position than just trying to cram someone at the last minute. But it is also perhaps the fault of the system that the system allows it. So, if there were some compulsory modules, so, if you had to do, for example, within the 5 years, a driver's hours course, and if you had to do a safe loading course, you couldn't just do 5 driver's hours courses then, for example. So I don't think there'd be much pushback from anybody in the industry if it was changed to say you have to do 1 or 2 or 3 core modules and then 1 or 2 or 3 job specific modules. I don't think there'd be any pushback on that at all.
No, definitely not. From what we've been hearing, what you've had the feedback and what I've had the feedback is definitely what we should be looking at and improving for everyone, including ourselves. Because I still go on the courses and you still teach them, Tony. It's got to help everyone across the board.
Absolutely. And also from a trainer's point of view, if you've got people that are engaged because it is relevant and it is interesting, that actually makes for a better and more interesting course to deliver, which is better for everybody in the room and more fun for the trainer.
Yeah, far more fun. And it is, because I learn most of my knowledge from other people on the course.
So really then what we've learned in sort of reviewing the basis of the government review is that in the main, drivers and our customers and us, we're all pretty much pro training. We think it's the right thing to do, and it is right to review it because there are a few little tweaks that could be done which could make it better for everybody.
Yeah, 100% agree. My personal opinion, 1 a year, and I understand why hauliers don't like doing it. They leave it to the last minute because drivers tend to change jobs. But if you invest in a driver once a year, even if they move on to another job, you've got to replace that driver with another one. If someone else has already invested in him as well, you've got the whole circle complete.
Well, it boils down to that old adage, which is what happens if you train a driver and he leaves? To which my answer is always, what happens if you don't train a driver and he stays? You take my point.
Yeah, 100%, because it couldn't be anything worse than leaving it to the last 2 months before and you've got to lose them for 5 working days. Oh, that must be a nightmare. Yeah. I mean, I know how busy we get at the end of the 5-year period covering that many shifts of people doing CPC. So I think that would stop that happening if we'd done 1 a year or within 18 months.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think this has been really interesting, actually. And I hope people listening have found that interesting too. We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. So, please write back to us via the podcast website or on Facebook or whichever way you're receiving this, LinkedIn or whatever. So yeah, I think that's great, Gary. Thank you very much indeed. And I look forward to speaking to you next time.
That was very positive and all the feedback from the drivers. And I really enjoyed being on location for a change, Tony.
Yeah, another podcast first. Brilliant. All right. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. Speak to you later.
You've been listening to the Driver Hire Podcast, and thank you very much.
And as goodbye from myself, Gary Richards at the Colchester office.
And from me, Tony Goacher at the Croydon and Sutton office. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find us at thedriverhirepodcast.co.uk.
Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.